Hi guys, and welcome to another Databases 101 video. So before we dive into really the cool stuff, the practical stuff like creating a database, inserting data, outputting data, and so on, we're going to have a look at a few more concepts that are really important to us and that will allow us to really understand what's going on behind the scenes and how a database really works. So here on my right, I have written two of the main topics that we're going to cover today, and these topics are data types and what we're gonna call rules. They're not actually called rules, there is another name for them, but we're gonna call them rules for now. That's why we have these double quotes around the rules name. So like I already mentioned in my previous video, there are data types that really determine the type of data that we can input in a database table. If you haven't had a look at that, go check out the previous video in this playlist. So here I have listed a few data types that are the most common one. There are a few more, and data types sometimes depend on the concrete type of the relational database that you're working with. Maybe you're working with SQL Server, maybe you're working with MySQL, or maybe Postgre or Oracle. But the majority of the data types are similar, and let's say that 90% are exactly the same. So here on my right I have written integer, varchar, big int, and decimal, and there are a few more, but let's start off with these. So I'm going to draw a simple table and explain you what these data types really are, but I won't get into too much detail because really there's a lot of documentation on the internet and you can easily inform yourself about what are each of these data types meant for and what are their ranges and so on. So what data are we going to store for this user? Well, we're going to store, let's say, an ID, a name, last name, and let's say phone. So let's think about it for a second. Let's say that each user has its ID. So an ID is probably going to be some number. So we're going to use an integer for this. So the column ID is going to be a type of integer. So I'm not going to write it here, but this column is only accepting integers, and in a nutshell, it's numbers, whole numbers. 1, 2, 3, 1,000, 5,000, 204, and so on. Whatever whole number you think of. The name and last name are going to be varchar, and really what varchar can do is store for us all kinds of text of a certain length. So we can say, okay, these two columns, first name and last name, are going to be storing varchar values that are a length of 1 to 1,000. So let's say that there is no person in the world that has a first name longer than 1,000 letters. There is another similar data type that's called text, and text type can store almost unlimited number of words, letters, and just text in general. But in our case, these two would be varchar columns, and the phone field, well, it really depends. Sometimes it can be an integer, sometimes it could be a numeric, sometimes it could be a varchar. Maybe you're storing the appendix to a number, so if you're storing plus 1601725 and so on, you're gonna have to allow your users to store this kind of phone. Then it would be wise to use varchar in that case. But let's say in our case, so let's say that that is the case with our table, and this would also be a varchar. So we have one integer column. These remaining columns are going to store varchar values. So if we try to enter a user that has a longer name than 1,000 letters, it would fail. Also, if we would try to insert a user that has an ID of ABC, it would also fail. Why? Because our ID column is going to be a type of integer, and that allows us to only store numbers in this column. So this would be okay. Let's say an ID of 3, a name of course, John, who else? A last name of Smith, and the phone of 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is fine, but let's say that I try to enter this. So we try to enter another user, and let's say the ID is ABLG, whatever, Daniel, and then a phone of plus 1, 2, 3, 6. So this would fail. Our database would not allow us to enter this user. Why is that? Well, because our ID allows only integer values, and this value includes letters, and that's not allowed. So this user would not be allowed to enter into our database. That's for the data types part. So feel free to look up, let's say, MySQL data types on the internet, and you'll find a bunch of resources there. And of course, we're going to have a more detailed look into data types in the next videos. So what are these rules that I'm talking about here? Well, there's another name for them, but we're going to mention that in our future videos. For now, let's just say that these are rules that somehow guarantee some kind of integrity in our database. So what if we're storing users, but this time we're going to be storing the ID of the users, the email, the first name, and the last name. So let me draw up another users table. So again, this is our users table. And as far as data types go, so this would be an integer, this would be a varchar, and these two would also be a varchar, and let's say that they would have a limit of 200 characters. But let's say that this table also has a column password. So in our case, let's extend our table a bit more. Password. So we're also storing users' passwords. So these are some users that can use our application. So does it make sense to have two users with the same email? It probably doesn't. So it would get kind of confusing. How can you have two users with the same email? If you're trying to sign up at any website and create one account with your email and then try to create another one with the same email, the system will most likely throw an error and say, well, this email is already taken, you cannot do that. So besides having the programming language that helps us in these cases, our database can also be of help. And how is that? Well, we can use rules to guarantee that in our users table we can store, let's say, unique values for the email column. So if we use our rules, so if we say that the email column must always have unique values, something like this cannot happen. So let's say that we have some kind of user that has an ID of 1. He has an email of a@gmail.com. His first name, John, of course, last name, Smith, and his password is 1234. So this is our first user, and let's say that this user tries to sign up again for our website. His ID would be 2. And let's say that he used the same email as last time, so a@gmail.com. Again, John, Smith, and 1234. So if we used our unique rule on this table and on the email column, this will be impossible to do. So this would throw an error. So the database will say, oh, okay, the column email must have always unique values, and here you have two that are repeating, so I'm not going to allow you to enter this guy here. We can also do the same for any of these columns, but really does it make sense to make the first name always unique? Well, it doesn't, because really we have unlimited really people on this planet that have a first name of John and a last name of Smith, and also passwords can be the same. So really this kind of rule, let's say unique, applies only to columns that really must be unique in any case. The second one that I will mention for now is the primary key unique rule. So as far as primary key goes, it's kind of similar to the unique rule. It's just that we use primary keys to really uniquely identify each of the rows in our database. So a primary key in our users table can be the ID column. So this ID can be an artificial one that we make up for each user each time we enter a user. So the first time we enter a user, he will have an ID of 1. The second time that user will have an ID of 2 and so on. But primary keys can be real world data like a citizen ID or a passport ID and so on. We'll get into more detail in the upcoming videos. And the last rule for now that we'll mention is the foreign key. And without getting into too much detail, it's just a rule that specifies how we connect two tables in a database together. So sometimes we would like to attach a category to our product. So each product has its category, and one category can belong to many posts. So we'll have a more detailed look into these foreign keys, primary keys, and unique keys and rules in our upcoming videos. But for now, just keep in mind that these kinds of things are there to really help us integrate our data and to keep our data from becoming redundant and really not that useful. So that'll be it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.